All right, well, today's topic, incomplete dominance. So let's talk a little bit about incomplete dominance. So in a normal situation, right, we have Gregor Mendel's law of dominant or recessiveness applying. And so what does that mean? In most situations where you have a tall or a short organism, one of those two traits or alleles will dominate over the other one. In this case, tall dominates over short, right? So in a heterozygous, like big T, little t, what ends up happening is because the big T dominates the little t, we get a tall organism, okay? So incomplete dominance works a little differently. So incomplete dominance is this. I take a black mouse and I cross it with a white mouse. Now, because this is incomplete dominance, and this is my preference, I don't. Not all people do it. Some will just use the heterozygous condition. But because neither one is actually dominant, what I do is I allow them both to have their own letter. So with black, what I do is I have a little b, and with white, I would have used a little w, okay? Now, because this organism was black, it didn't have any incomplete dominance, so it must have gotten a black from one parent, a black from the other, so you'd be crossing a big B, a little b, okay? And then this one would be a little w. And let me show you why that is, okay? So what would happen is if we took this black and we crossed it with a white, what would end up happening is this. So if we made a Punnett square, 2 letters times 2 letters, all right, we'd have 4 letters in our Punnett square, okay? And so what ended up happening would be, if we put this organism here, 50% of the time that little b, 50% of the time the little b on the right. Up top, the w's, 50% of the time the left one, 50% of the time the right one. And so what would end up happening is you'd have organisms that were this, BW, 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 and BW. And so what would end up in this situation is if we looked at the genotypic ratio, right, the letters, they would be all BW. Now, what does that mean? Well, in this case, we get an incompletely dominant situation. And so phenotypically, what do they look like? Well, they all end up being the mixture of these two dominant coats, which would be gray. Okay? So on your problems now, back to it, it says, partial dominance or incomplete dominance is expression of a heterozygous phenotype that is different from either of the parents. An intermediate phenotype is usually observed. Example, black and white producing gray mice. Okay? And then the second one says red flowered plants crossed with white flowered plants giving rise to pink flowered plants. So let's do that. It says here, in Mendels Experiment, all traits had clear dominant recessive patterns. However, the absence of dominance of one member of a pair of alleles is quite common in most organisms. So, for example, in crosses between red-flowered snapdragons and white-flowered snapdragons, the F1 produces only pink-flowered intermediates, meaning the heterozygous. When the F1 are crossed with themselves, the F2 plants consist of 1/4 red, half pink, quarter white. So let's show you that in this space right here, all right? So what it's saying there is if you had a red organism and a white. Now, this is incompletely dominant, so again, we're going to allow little r to be that, and little w. And so just like over here, what would happen is, okay, if this was your P generation, your parents, what would end up happening is you would end up with little r, little w, right here and there. So they'd all end up being RW, 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 RW. And so genotypic ratio would be all little r, little w. But the phenotypic ratio in this case, because it's incompletely dominant, what would end up happening is they would all be pink. Okay? Now, some people will do that a little bit differently. Some people will assign a letter, but I don't like giving them a dominant or capital letter because it doesn't dominate over the other one. Now, for the F1 generation, so that's these organisms right here, right, the F1, if we took 2 of them and we crossed them, So we took an RW, which would phenotypically look pink, right? And we cross that with another RW, again, phenotypically pink. What would end up happening is we would end up with this situation. Well, 50% of the time R, 50% of the time W. Okay? 50% of the time, 50% of the time. So here we go. So we end up with an RR, RW, RW, and WW. So the genotypic ratio in this case ends up being 1 RR to 2 RW to 1 WW. Now, what does that actually mean phenotypically? Meaning, what do they look like? Well, this 1 RR would be red. These 2 RWs, they would be pink. And this one would be white. So my last question before I release you to do some crosses and do this kind of thing is this. So if I wanted to get red every time, is there a way for me to do that? Well, what if I crossed a red RR with an RR? Would I get a red every time in the answer? Yeah. What if I wanted to get a white every time? Same thing, right? I could take a white, cross with a white, I'm just going to get W's all the time. What if I wanted to get a pink one every time? Is there a way to do that? Well, if I took a red one, crossed it with the white one, I got a pink one every single time, didn't I? So we cross a red with a white. Okay? So we can get it. So if you were a florist, this could be a nice advantage if you were, multiplying snapdragons and trying to create flowers for a dance, a homecoming, a prom, etc., etc. So that is the overview of incomplete dominance. What you should do now is you should complete all the problems on this page. Number 1 talks about 4 o'clock flowers. Then on the back, you should look into guinea pigs. Okay, same thing there. Talk about coat color on them. And let's see. For number 3, you're talking about radishes. Okay, the long shape being partially dominant to the round shape. Number 4, a disease in human blood, okay, with cholesterol called hypercholesterolemia. All right, and then number 5 deals with the coat color of horses. But that's an overview of incomplete dominance, and again, you should finish the 2 pages now in your packet having to do with incomplete dominance. Use your Schoology to check it, to check your work.